That shop has a lot of unfair advantages. And I got to say, if we don't have unfair advantages in our business, and I know you're a business coach, I know you're telling your clients this, and probably in different words, but if we don't have unfair advantages, we don't have any business being in business. I mean, we're not going to stick
Good
around.
call. That's
You
right.
have to have those.
Do you have any advice on how do we identify our unfair advantage?
Well, okay, so I have a diagram that we might want to use to
Sure.
identify them. It's almost like it is sort of one of the most highly creative processes that I've ever seen in all of my time in business.
My new friend, Stu Heinecke. This guy is a best-selling author. I came to know him from How to Get a Meeting with Almost Anyone. Been stalking him ever since. Great content. Written a book, How to Grow Your Business Like a Weed. Has all the things, all the analogies. This guy is a Wall Street cartoonist, award-winning, everything under the sun kind of dude. Super sharp. Sit back, take a listen, and learn from Stu. Do more by doing less. With me, Charles Alexander, for small business owners, startups, and busy folks. Speaking of that, and somebody listening can't see, somebody watching can. You talking about all these different plants. You got a plant behind you, don't you?
Yeah, well, yeah, that's true. That's a nightshade.
Nightshade. All things. This man loves a good weed. So I've been following Stu for a long
Certain kind of
time.
weeds.
Yeah, certain kind of weeds, not
kind.
all of them. That's your next book, dude. I've been following you for a while. Really got hooked in when you were doing, all how to get a meeting with anyone. And I even here in a little bit, I'll show. I even tried to follow some of that format. But your latest book on how to grow your business like a weed goes. I mean, for anybody that loves a good analogy, doggone Stu picked this one completely apart and is fantastic. So in plain English, tell us what it means to grow your business like a weed, or rather back up. What made you even think to write a book like this?
I used to live in LA, and I was driving down the Santa Monica freeway one day, a long time ago. And, it was a nice day, and the traffic was moving well. And so there are 6 lanes going one way, 6 lanes coming the other way, a lot of roaring tires and, concrete. And then in the middle, there's this concrete median. And I noticed there was this dandelion growing from a crack in the concrete median. And, that's a thing that we see all the time. We see them everywhere.
Sure.
But this time it stuck with me. I looked at it and I just thought, look at this thing. That's amazing. How did it end up in the middle of a freeway?
Right.
But we know exactly how it ended up in the middle of a freeway. They have those seeds that fly around and they probe every possible opportunity to take root. And that's already a great start of a definition for an entrepreneur, isn't it?
Right.
But so they end up everywhere, and they're sort of, well, they're just kind of a super plant. If you think about it, there are no apple trees or petunias that are growing out of those cracks in the concrete median. They don't make it. They really don't have what it takes to be a weed. And so this all happened as I was driving by in an instant, because I thought, look at this thing. It looks happy. It looks like it's just, it had those happy yellow flowers and the seed pods, and the seeds are blowing around. And it looked like it was just happy to be there running its process. And so I just thought, all that split second, I thought, but wait a minute, what is it about weeds that makes them so special? Why do we know weeds? I mean, we know that expression, to grow like a weed. Why do they do it? How do they do that? And do they have a model?
Do you actually know the answer behind that? Side note, why do weeds grow like a weed?
Yeah, no, I have no idea. Oh yeah, I've thought about it a lot.
Yeah.
And so, well, the thing is, I was wondering, what is it? What makes them so special? And do they have a unified model that every weed follows? And if they do, is it something we can apply to our business? And I'm not going to keep joking with you, Charles. I'm not going to say no, none of that is.
Right.
No, actually, they do have a model, and I think it's actually the theory of everything about growing anything. It's incredible when you apply what they do to your business, or really to almost anything that you want to grow. It's amazing what happens. I'm applying it to the book, so that yields all kinds of interesting results.
I'm sure.
Yeah.
Well, give me, you talking about like a framework or a formula, and it's something you've broken down. Tell us in plain English what that formula looks like for a weed, and then how that applies to anybody running a business.
Yeah, I'm gonna express it 2 ways. So one is the model. You're gonna have to suspend belief for a little while, because
no worries,
they don't have brains. So they do have a mindset though, and they've got sort of a collective intelligence. So they leverage a fierce mindset and unfair advantages against collective scale. And they do it according to a process that is honed over, well, in their case, it's well honed over millions of years,
Mhm.
yet it's a living process. It's able to adapt to challenges instantly, or let's say relatively instantly, and meet those challenges. But so that's one way of looking at it. The other one is just to sort of describe the nature of weeds. And weeds, we could say, deal with what is. We have a really hard time doing that. Our emotions get
Sure.
in the way constantly. But weeds deal with what is. They never do anything without an unfair advantage. They never do anything alone. They're natural collaborators. They always focus on what makes them win. That's their process. And finally, they thrive best in disrupted ground. And I think that aspect is really interesting because, they don't do anything differently when they encounter disrupted ground. They just use their process and their tools and their attributes, and they're just perfectly honed to thrive during disruption. All of those things are incredible attributes for us in business. So that does that explain it, or should I
That
unpack that a
that
little?
does explain it, and that if you humor me, I'd like to go into each one of those
Yeah.
and tell me if it makes more sense. You were talking about they have not necessarily a mindset, but they've got well, they don't have
Well,
a
they
brain, they
do.
have a mindset,
They don't have brains,
but they have a
but they
mindset.
do
What
have
does that mean?
collective intelligence, and you only have to watch what they do, let's say in your yard or in your garden, to realize that if you cut them down, if they're in your lawn, they're going to come right back. If you do anything to cut them away, anything other than, let's say, remove the roots, you're not going to get rid of them. And they will just, whatever it is you do, they just go back to running the process. They're not afraid. They're not depressed. They're not anything. They
They
just
just
run it
they
like a,
just bounce right back.
yeah,
We have a pool, and I for whatever reason, we thought it'd be a brilliant idea to leave a little landscaping around the pool, add some greenery, and unfortunately, I have the greatest weed barrier known to mankind that is totally helpless against the Bermuda grass and the weeds that grow in and around it. And you're exactly right. They just kind of smile at me, pop back up, say, "Hey, Charles, what's going on today?" So I just
yeah.
pulled you out yesterday. It's like, you didn't quite get me, bud. Anyway, and they just keep rolling back in no matter what.
They do. They do. And so you can see there's this evident mindset there that we need to adopt to thrive in our businesses. And so again, going back to the dandelion that's popping out seeds that fly everywhere and probe every possible opportunity to take root. We need to have that same kind of mindset. And we have to have the same kind of mindset that says, whenever we have a setback or not, just when we're running our process, we need to be aggressive and urgent, resilient, and adaptive. And we also need to be natural collaborators. So all of that factors into the weed. This sounds strange to call it a
Yeah.
weed mindset. This really does sound like, you know, smoking a,
For those of you that are listening, not watching, Stu's giving the little what my uncle would have called the left-handed cigarette signal.
and it's
So
not this. It's
no,
not that kind. It's this
no.
kind. Yeah.
But in
Actually,
looking at that, so do you have for either, your own personal examples? I know you've grown your business telling people how to grow business, or do you have examples that other people have given you from, having read your book or just altogether different?
you mean in terms of, let's say, cultivating unfair advantages, which is part
Yes.
of it. Yeah.
Unfair advantage, great place to start. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, so it's really interesting to try to describe that because almost anything could be an unfair advantage. But I would define it this way, that it's anything that causes anything that is a determining cause for you to get business versus your competitors that your competitors can't match. Does that make sense?
That makes perfect sense. What
Yeah. So a lot of times, if I ask people, "What are your unfair advantages?" They'll say, "I don't know. I give we have great customer
right.
service."
I have years of
Well,
experience. I've got a certification.
exactly. Something that your competitors can match immediately, So that's not what it is. But there are great examples. Let's say in big businesses. For one, SpaceX is a great example of a,
Mhm.
a company with incredible unfair advantages. But maybe the biggest one, there are a lot of them, but maybe the biggest one is they worked out a way to to send a booster into space and deliver cargo either into space and deep space into low Earth orbit, wherever, to the space station, and they're delivering cargo and astronauts. They're a full-fledged launch agency, but they use boosters that come back down and land propulsively. So they don't waste the boosters every time they shoot up a load of cargo into outer space. So they get to use these boosters over and over and over again, and they lower the
Mhm.
cost of bringing cargo and astronauts to space. No one can match it. And so that's the whole point. They have a much lower cost for launch, but the other part of it, the reason why they do is that they have this technology that no one else can match. That's an unfair advantage. And we need those kinds of things in our business. So that's an example of, let's say, a large company. But on the island where I live, there are a few business services shops on the island. And you can go in there and you can get pens and paper, or whatever, the kind of stuff you need to have an office in your home. And, with the pandemic, or thanks to the pandemic, we have a lot of people working from home here. So,
Sure.
what's going to drive these people to go to one shop versus the other? And what is it that's going to cause that
Advantage. Yeah. What's going to be the
unmatchable?
thing that only that one can do that nobody else can?
Yeah. And it's a simple thing that one of them has, which is that they double as a reception point for FedEx packages, or collection point, I should say, for
Okay.
FedEx packages. And all of us use FedEx. So we take almost daily drives into that shop. They don't have to advertise, they don't have to do anything. They just collect our packages and we walk in and we buy other things, or we buy stuff while we're there. So that's an unfair advantage because the other shops don't have that. And FedEx isn't going to keep putting in a lot of different collection points. So in the local market, that they have that unfair advantage that's not going to be matched by any other competing shop. I have unfair advantages that are kind of unique. One of them is I'm one of the Wall Street Journal cartoonists. I mean, that's what ultimately what led me to write How to Get a Meeting with Anyone, because
Sure.
I've used cartoons to break through to anyone. That's an unfair advantage, that you could get a meeting with anyone or
That's
break
right.
through to someone.
And for anybody, gosh, anybody that wants to get a meeting with anybody, get that book. Stu makes a great example. And in that book, he gives out tons and tons of examples of something you will send to a decision maker that will immediately stand out, be unique, be personable. And he's got dozens of examples. I'm going to ask him for a couple here in a second. But his unfair advantage, and we're really getting meta here, in doing that is when he does a cartoon, you would do this giant foam cartoon board that looks like it came right out of the Wall Street Journal. I later started tinkering around with it, got all excited, read the book, and I do business coaching, but I also do explainer videos. So I started sending a I would print out an explainer video example of me talking to, let's say, financial advisors, because that was the unfair advantage I'm trying to cultivate, is working directly with them. And if you're watching, this will be great. If you're listening, I'm so sorry, but go to the YouTube page and you'll see where I would print out an image of me talking to that financial advisor, and then on the reverse side of how they could contact me. And it did work, and it did stand out. But I even asked, Stu wouldn't remember this, I got on a webinar with him after a while and said, hey man, this isn't working. I said, it does pretty well, why is it not working? And Stu just looked at me and said, well, you're not a Wall Street cartoonist.
I'm sorry.
You were
Well,
nice
look,
about it when
you
you
know,
said it. I just gave you the gist of it. Stu was like, you need that does work sometimes, but find other things that can help you stand out, not just an explainer video printout. Either way, that was a
yeah.
long way around, but that was a great example of what you're talking about. Unfair advantage. So when Stu wants a meeting with anybody, by God, he can get it because he has the unfair advantage.
I'll just tell you, just going back to your comment about the cartoon, when I first started out in business, I ended up putting this group of cartoonists together from the New Yorker and Playboy. What ended up happening was I ended up being mentored by some of the best cartoonists in the world at the time,
Right.
from Playboy and the New Yorker. So I really have a deep, deep background in using cartoons. And then the agency that all came, how do I put this? I had an agency, and the agency
Right.
had a collection of cartoonists, and we created a lot of direct mail campaigns with cartoons with personalization. And so I ended up getting a lot of test history or test experience, a really unmatched test experience using personalized cartoons in the mail. So there's another unfair advantage. Nobody else has that
No.
amount of test experience. So when I use them in contact devices, then gosh, I would love to hold one up. I have one behind me, but a big board, but it's too big. You won't.
We can always visit when we get done here. You'll tell everybody about your website, and I know they can see an example there.
Yeah, I think there's must be one there. I can't remember, but anyway. But on the other hand, if you were sending it out and it was a cartoonist from, let's say, the New Yorker, or
Sure.
someone who has a fanhood, another unfair advantage, but they've already known and they have fans, that actually does make a big difference.
Of
So
course, yes.
yeah, yeah. So that you can see there's a bunch of these unfair
Oh
advantages
my gosh,
throughout what
yes.
I'm doing.
And in business coaching, I've got clients that, I had one that started a men's clothing store, and then they moved it to a men's big and tall shop, and then they moved it to a men's big and tall consignment shop. And that was very niche and an unfair advantage. Men's big and tall clothes are very expensive. There was nowhere else around here that was doing it. And they jumped out in front of everybody to such a degree that it didn't make sense for anybody else to get into the business. They have an unfair advantage. If you're a big guy or a tall guy and you don't want to spend a fortune on clothes, they are really your only option.
Yeah, then that shop has a lot of unfair advantages. And I got to say, if we don't have unfair advantages in our business, and I know you're a business coach, I know you're telling your
Right.
clients this, probably in different words, but if we don't have unfair advantages, we don't have any business being in business. I mean, we're not going to stick
Good
around.
call. That's
You
right.
have to
That's
have those.
Do you have any advice on how do we identify our unfair advantage?
Well, okay, so I have a diagram that we might want to use to
Sure.
identify them. It's almost like it is sort of one of the most highly creative processes that I've ever seen in all of my time in business. How do we recognize what our unfair advantages are, and then how do we build more? But I would say that if you might have IP. You're a coach, so I'm
Right.
sure you have
Yeah, yeah, yeah. There's
unique IP.
at least if nothing else, what I always look at is like a Venn diagram in this case. And for those of you that don't know what a Venn diagram is, but it's those three fancy circles that all overlap each other, and you try to find your unfair advantage of what would be in the center of that. So it might be the things that you have unique strengths in that a lot of people don't have. And then the other piece of that puzzle is what are customers not getting from the competition? And then the other circle is what is the competition not doing? And in the center, I'm guessing should be an unfair advantage.
That's probably a great way to find it. One of the things is that if one great source of unfair advantages, if you're able to confer unfair advantages on your clients. So, for example, when I was creating at the very beginning of my career, I was creating those direct mail campaigns with personalized cartoons. We got through when I don't know if you remember,
Oh, I'll
but
bet.
I mean, direct mail used to be about teaser lines on the outer
Mhm.
envelope, or they'd also call it they'd also talk about lumpy packages. There might be a pencil or some little
Sure.
piece of plastic in there. Some of the worst of them were the ones that were window envelopes that had sort of that safety paper of a check. So you'd look at it and you go, "Oh my
Oh
God, I
man,
just got a
got some
check. I got
money.
to open this up." It's all misleading stuff. So we would send ours out, and the cartoons in the stack of mail, they do what they do in magazines and newspapers, which is that cartoons are already the best read and remembered parts of magazines and newspapers. So we knew it would stand out in the pile of mail. And when you look at it, then you go, "Oh my God, wait a minute, this cartoon's not." I don't know if they would know who Gahan Wilson is, but they would recognize the style. They'd say, "Oh my
Sure,
God,
that's
this is
right.
my famous cartoonist, and it's about me. Holy cow! What
Yeah,
is this?" And people would clip those out and stick them up on the refrigerator doors. They do all kinds of things with our mailings that they weren't doing with any other forms of mail. So when we created a test campaign for a client, it's likely that we were going to give them a new unfair advantage because we'd get more response at a lower cost per order. So any unfair advantage, you're doing it for your clients as well, Charles. When you coach them, you're helping them move
that's
to a
right.
more
They,
productive path in their business. And probably
so
more, particularly, I would imagine I've never been coached by you, but I would imagine one of the things that you're doing is saying you've got to build a process, because if you don't build a
that's
process, you
right.
can never sell your business. And if you can't sell your business, you're not building value in it. I mean, some
That
businesses you can't sell, I would think, but
sure.
there are a lot that you can, but you can't if there's no process there, for example. So I know you're
So,
giving them unfair
uh,
advantages, and that's
well,
one of the biggest ones we could have.
in looking at that, to link it back, one of those unfair advantages of working with any coach is collaboration. And let's
Yeah.
get back to that
Yeah.
because I've never in my life thought about weeds as being collaborative.
Weeds are that I think that's one of the greatest gifts that we can pull from weeds. And one of the greatest sources that we were just talking about unfair advantages, one of the greatest sources we can create for ourselves is to create new collaborations. Let's just take a hypothetical. Let's say that as a result, I hope this actually happens. We should be talking about this, but let's say as a result of our interview together today, we decide, hey, let's explore a collaboration, because you and I could probably do a great mastermind together. Let's say a
Sure.
limited run mastermind, and we'd make some money, but we'd also have this great combination between us that would the participants would walk away from that sort of thing and have this new, really unique value that they've pulled from it. So we should be doing that with all kinds. I think if the weeds could speak to us, one of the things they would tell us, there are a few things they'd tell us, but one of them
I'm
is
sure.
if you want to grow, you need to team up with the smartest people you know as fast as you can. And I would say, let's say smartest and most impressive people you know
Mhm.
as fast as you can. When you do that, then you're each tapping into each other's networks and maybe bases of clients and so on. So you can't help but grow your business that way. I mean, both of you. So yeah, collaborations are a great way to expand your business, but also to create new unfair advantages. And there's one really cool example I have, but I don't want to keep giving you a run-on answer.
Oh, I love examples. Do it.
Oh, okay. Well, I mentioned that I'm using weed strategy to grow the book, How to Grow Your Business Like a Weed. And one of those, well, the big one is that I have formed a collaboration with the NASDAQ Entrepreneurial Center, and that centers around a new award called the Total Weed Award. And so I love it because when I
I
tell
was going
people,
to say, you should love that, right?
yeah, if I tell people, God, you're a total, Charles, you're a total weed, people are usually saying,
Yeah.
gee, wow, thank you, Stu. But the Total Weed Award is about celebrating weed-like spread and growth among entrepreneurs and startups. So what better partner could I have or collaborator could I have than the NASDAQ Entrepreneurial Center? So they're actually the home of the award. And the center is also part of the bigger organization, NASDAQ itself. And we're looking at maybe involving NASDAQ itself, maybe doing this. We launched it at the end of May this year. And for next year, we're looking at possibly doing starting a live event
Mhm.
here, and it'll be an annual event. So, but doing it at the NASDAQ building in Times Square. And we're pulling in a media partner. I don't know who it's going to be yet, but we're pitching them right now. So the award will have a media partner, but by extension, they're just going to ask, where does this award come from? It comes from this book. And oh my gosh, do we know anything about that book? No, they haven't covered the book yet.
Sure.
It's CNBC and Forbes and so on didn't cover this one. So when they're approached by us, I would say really by NASDAQ, to say, we've got this other property we'd like you to take a look at that we'd like you to consider being our media partner, they're going to listen to that. I mean, it's not
Mhm.
like one of thousands of publicists coming at them. So it's NASDAQ saying, could you take a look at this? And when they take a look at the source of it, it's almost as though by extension, the book gets a media partner. And I don't know of any other books. I know a lot of authors, and I know what they're doing to promote their books. I don't know of any other authors or books that have that going. So Weed Strategy brought that into being, and I don't think I would have done that without the Weed Strategy. I don't know that I would have been thinking in terms of who can I collaborate with, who would be outrageous to collaborate with.
Sure.
So it
And
has become my sort of number one plank of how just my process in my business now. I'm always looking for ways to collaborate with interesting and impressive people who have
Mhm.
big followings, especially because it's not going to do much if we don't have people
Sure.
paying attention. But
And that's one thing that always works out really well when, especially with doing podcasting or podcast guesting, is that you get opportunities to chat with people you would normally get to talk with. But I've had so many clients, I've done it so many times over the years. I've got a good friend of mine, have been bouncing folk workshops back and forth together for years. He does one on referral marketing and network marketing, and I would do a little more on becoming process driven, or just in some cases getting a business started up. But you can host webinars together, workshops together. You can go on each other's podcasts. You can also looking at your other strategy of how to get a meeting with anybody, and to really steal from back in the day with Chet Holmes on the Ultimate Sales
oh,
Machine, get that
yeah,
Dream 100 going. That
yeah,
what's .com guy that Russell Brunson has repopularized so much. If I identify who that is, get in front of him. Go read Stu's other book. It's got all the reviews and all the accolades along with this one about how to get a meeting with anybody. And then once you do that, collaborate with them like a weed.
yeah, absolutely. You should be collaborating. We should be collaborating with a lot of people. We should have a lot of collaborations. And as I just described with NASDAQ, that collaboration gives me another unfair advantage. How do you compete with that? I guess it would be other authors competing with it, but how are you going to compete with that?
It's tough.
Yeah.
So to bring this weed strategy kind of home here, one other thing you did mention is disruption, which is an often
Yeah.
used word, but what does it mean in terms of a weed?
Well, when I'm saying that they thrive best in disrupted ground's a great description for our yards, our gardens,
Mhm.
farmland, because we're tearing it up all the time. And they're just perfectly suited to, I mean, if you turn over your lawn, if you just like destroy your lawn, get rid of it, we know
Mhm.
what's going to show up. It's the weeds.
That's
So
right.
weeds recognize those. I don't know that they're recognizing it. Their process is such that they spread into it. they're not doing anything differently either. It's still the same model, the same process, but it just works really well in that disrupted ground during times of disruption. I guess the only time maybe, I mean, if there's a fire, perhaps, but they also have mechanisms for that. They have seeds that will wait in the ground and they'll
Mhm.
wait for the right time. There's some, I can't remember the species of weed, but there's one species that has seeds that'll wait in the ground as long as 60 years. So they'll sense what the conditions are above ground. And if it's not right yet, then they won't pop out. But when you see, I mean, if you ever see the aftermath of a forest fire, the first thing that's going to show up are weeds. That's because they're just using that same process, that same set of attributes and strategies and tools to do what they always do. But just like the dandelion that ended up in the crack in the concrete median, they'll end up wherever that disrupted ground is, and they'll colonize it quickly. They'll add it to their, and if we could think of turf as, let's say, the equivalent of market share in business, they're just natural gobblers of. They create market share quickly, and it all has to do with using that same weed model.
Well,
It's
and you're talking about disruption. We've seen so many times disruption, but we always see it in hindsight. Where Uber, and these are overused examples, but humor me. The Uber disrupts the rideshare market, or Amazon disrupts the sending you everything at home market. Airbnb. Right now, we don't see it in hindsight. It's happening in real time, and a lot of us are ignoring all the different things that AI is bringing to the table, and how you don't have to adopt all things and become the HAL robot from Space Odyssey, but you can utilize it to create unfair advantages and to give you opportunities for collaboration. So that disruption
yeah.
is happening right now. You just need to take advantage of it.
But I would call that entrepreneurial disruption, and
That's
and
right.
it's and the disruption, and it's true, and that is. I mean, the thing is, in life, we're living lives that are just full of disruption, and primarily talking about recessions and the pandemic.
Got you.
In San Francisco, the real estate market, the commercial real estate market, is tanking. And so the people who are in that market, because we've just been hearing in the news that some of the major hotels are pulling out, one of the major
Mhm.
mall operators is pulling out. They're just saying, we're not going to service the debt anymore. If you think about it, if you have backing of investors, you've got to have money to do this, but this is probably a good time to buy real estate,
I bet
right?
you're
And so
right.
the weeds, that would be the weed approach would be, okay, when there's a vacuum, when others are pulling out, when that is highly disrupted ground,
Sure.
that's a great time to pull in. And think about this 10 years from now when conditions are different. You will, if anyone who's buying real estate in,
Sure.
in downtown San Francisco, if they're able to afford it, will be making billions on that. So I think that's really what I'm talking about but you're right. AI, it's another one of those. AI
Sure.
is going to change. It is changing everything, and it'll continue to change things. I guess we'll resist it maybe a little bit, but AI is pretty cool. It's pretty amazing. And if there are, I kind of like two classes of us, those who use it and those who don't. But that's a source of
Sure.
disruption that weed strategy would help you.
And I love the example that you gave, and that's, where, basically others are zigging, you should be zagging, and that's exactly what a weed does. So we're getting pretty close to the end of our time here. What I like to ask, though, and kind of keeping in the theme of the podcast, and this may play well into what we were just discussing, Stu, is there some things that I always like to learn how to do more by doing less? Is there anything right now, as you're doing all the book promotion and you got 15 different things going on, or is there some things that you should be doing less of?
There's probably a lot of that, but there are things
Yeah.
that I'm adhering to weed strategy, and one of the things I mentioned, that weeds deal with what is, and they have that fierce mindset. And I think that one of the other things weeds would tell us is that we've noticed that you have emotions and they get in your way all the time. We don't have emotions, the weeds. We don't have emotions, but
Mm.
we notice you have them and they get in your way all the time. And so there are things you need to do, but you don't do them because maybe you just don't feel like it, or you feel discouraged. Anything. Our emotions are playing us in a big way. So they would tell us, let your actions lead your emotions. And so one way that takes form is, I know I need to go to the gym. And so rather than waiting until I feel like it, I'm just going. I have a schedule and I keep it. I was there this morning, and I just keep it, and you get stronger and you feel better. Every time you walk out of the gym, you feel like $1 million. So
So
you
the
wouldn't have
going
had that.
the going to the gym part, that would be what you would do more of. What would you do less of that gives you an opportunity to send you to the gym?
Yeah, well, I guess it was that allowing my emotions to lead my actions. Say, I don't
Gotcha.
feel like it,
Let less downer emotions and more more getting after it opportunities.
Yeah, I would say I spend too much time inside, so get outside. I'm hiking once a week
Good.
too, but get outside more, get off the screen more. Yeah,
That's great advice.
yeah.
So, Stu, what you're a best-selling author a few times over. Give us another book that either you're reading right now or another book we don't know about that we should be reading in general.
Well, there's one, it's not a particularly new one. Oh gosh, where is it? Oh, it's called Living an Extraordinary Life by
Okay.
Robert White. And I don't know that it's new. I met Robert, we were introduced and I didn't know quite who he was. And as we were talking, I asked him, have you ever tried, did you ever hear of something called LifeSpring, which is this test thing, this course that I took as a young man? And he
Mhm.
said, yeah, I was the founder of it.
Oh,
Oh my
wow.
God. So he's an amazing source. So that's Robert White and Living an Extraordinary Life.
Good deal. Stu, how can somebody find you?
Well, I guess there are two ways. One, I'd love to have you come to my site and join my list. Just sign up for the first two chapters of How to Grow Your Business Like a Weed, and join my list because we're doing all kinds of really crazy and interesting things about creating unfair advantages and radical collaborations and just a lot of different really
Mhm.
interesting. There are a lot of really interesting collaborations coming up actually. So I'd love to have you get on the list. Go to stuheinecke.com. And then also, if you'd like to connect with me on LinkedIn, do that. Just mention that you sat in with Charles and me, and I'll be
Doggone
happy to
right.
join.
Stu, I appreciate you taking the time to hang out with us today. I know more about weeds than I ever thought I would.
Thank you so much, Charles.
All right, have a good one. Wait. Don't run off just yet. Do me a big favor, hit the little plus sign to subscribe, scroll down wherever you are, and leave a very honest 5-star review and tell other people why they should be listening. And if you don't, an angel may in fact lose its wings. True story. Have a great day.